was madder than anybody I'd ever seen. Madder than I'd ever seen Daddy, I'll rephrase that. And he was talking to the policeman, and he was saying, we're going to get this guy, you know, we're going to do this. And I remember telling Daddy, I was laying there in ICU, I said, Daddy, it was an accident. It was an accident. And he said, well, that guy was drunk. It was still an accident. He didn't get in the car and drive and intend to kill somebody. It was an accident. But I remember the look on Daddy's face, you know, and everybody teased me, well, you were on drugs, you know, you were on morphine, and none of that made sense. But it wasn't drugs. Drugs affect you physically. This was a peace I had inside of me, and the only way I can attribute that peace is to God being with me. 23rd Psalms come to mind. We all know it. Even though I was walking through the valley of the shadow of death, God was walking with me, holding my hand. I remained in ICU for a while and was transferred to Denton. I had several surgeries. I can't even count how many. My stomach looks like a road map. So I can't wear a bikini anymore. That's my excuse. So I had a lot of surgeries. I had elbow surgery. I had hernia surgery. Everything was concentrated in my abdomen. And Mom and Dad, while I was in the hospital, they took care of all my physical needs. My family was there. David and Marcia graciously took over the funeral arrangements and made all the arrangements. And of course, as being a young couple, I came to think, you know, when we started talking about funeral arrangements, I don't have the money to pay for 3 funerals. Who has that kind of money laying around when you're a young married couple? And just as soon as that thought hit my brain, David told me, don't worry about it. Someone's taking care of it. Anonymously. I can't tell you the overwhelming gratitude I had at that moment. I couldn't even imagine. When something like that happens for you, you realize no matter how much money you've got, you need to be sharing that money, giving that money to help people. Pastor Vic Cassad, a few of you remember, I always thought it was Cassad, but I just learned recently it's Cassad. He took over the funerals. He drove to Petrolia where we lived, about an hour and a half away, and he visited with the students that Larry taught. He visited with the administration. He visited with the classmates of Cliff and Adrian. And he told the most beautiful stories at the funeral. I wasn't able to come, and Mom and Dad stayed with me, but they recorded it. In several weeks, months, I don't know, I got up enough courage to sit with Mom and Dad on the couch and watch that funeral. And I was overwhelmed with the amount of people that were here. I understand this was filled, the sanctuary, the fellowship hall was filled, there were people standing outside. That's all I'm going to talk about, the healing. Because healing is a lot more than the absence of pain. The physical pain was just a minor problem. I had something else that I had to deal with, and that was forgiveness. One of the most difficult tasks we face. I thought trials were like Law and Order. You know, an hour, 2 hours maybe max. They find the criminal, he's sentenced, he goes to jail for life. End of story. It's all good. Well, it didn't happen that way. This went on for years, almost 2 years total. So I had to relive this over and over. And I didn't want to forgive. You know, I realized that it was an accident, but I still thought that man made that decision to get in that truck and drink and drive. And he made that decision, and he ruined my life. And it's hard to forgive somebody when they ruin your life, you think. But I prayed about it. I went to counseling with pastors. I think the office was back in there. I sat and talked to him for hours. I'll always be grateful for his advice. But the one thing, you can kind of get yourself to forgive somebody. But there's one more part to that. You have to forget. And it's easy to tell somebody you forgive them and to hug them and kiss them and say, oh, we're friends, you know, no hard feelings. But you forget it. That's where your struggle comes in, because you see that person again and you think, I remember what you did to me. But you have to learn to forget, let it go. The man, just in a nutshell, I'm sure if you've read the book, you know the whole story. He plea bargained out on 3 counts of vehicular manslaughter and was sentenced to only 1 year per count. So he was to serve 1 year for each of my family's life. And he was out of prison in 1.5 years. That didn't seem right to me. I felt powerless. But the fight for justice was over. He was in jail. He was out of jail. I had the good fight, but I'd lost what I thought I had lost. I did everything I could in my power to bring justice. I wrote letters. My friends wrote letters. Many of you wrote letters. We tried our best to get him put away for a long time. And you were my armor of God. You helped me. You taught me how to petition the courts trying to get it a stiffer sentence. But it didn't work. And I struggled with that. And one day, the television channels in Wichita Falls wanted to interview me, and I thought, what am I going to say? How can you say you still hate somebody, that you can't forgive them? And I went in my room and I prayed. And in Isaiah it says, God gives us power to the weak and strength to the powerless. I was powerless. I needed the power to forgive. God would have forgiven him if he'd asked. If that man had asked for forgiveness, he would have been forgiven, just like he would forgive you. One of us for gossiping, he would have forgiven him, and he may have. I don't know what happened to him. I came to that point where I forgot. I had to trust God again, and he had to show me how to forgive him. It's over. It's forgotten. So you have to trust in God. How do we do that when we live in the flesh? God made us human. He gave us a mind, a dangerous thing. He gave us a mind to make our own decisions. So then your mind starts thinking, well, God, how could you do that to my family? How could you let my husband die? Many of you have been in that situation. How can you let my spouse die? How could you let that man go free? And then I learned from reading the Bible, God didn't do those things. God doesn't do bad things to us. I never blamed God. That was one thing, I never blamed him. I knew enough from my mustard seed of faith that God would not harm me or my family. God allows us to make our own decisions. Once we make them, he can take over those decisions. He's in control at all times. Even though he lets us think that we can make our own decisions, he's in control. And it took me writing this book and my sister harassing me until I let her read it. So she answered a question for me, a question that had kind of been eating at me. And she said she had thought God was a selfish God. The first commandment says, "Thou shalt have no other God before me." We all have other gods in our lives, whether we want to admit it or not. We have people, family. We have things that we put before God. We have celebrities, football on Sunday morning. How many times have you had to, I still say God created DVRs. There's a lot more men in church now that God created DVRs. But, we laugh, but it's true. We put so many things aside. It's like, well, Jenny has a basketball tournament I've got to go to. But you have to remember there's others, which I know that wouldn't have happened. Jenny doesn't play basketball. It was just a name. But the Bible talks about other gods as being idols. Anything or anyone that you love more than God is an idol. So think back to those 3 people that you were talking about. God isn't being arrogant or selfish with this commandment. He's protecting us. Have no other God. He's guarding us. He's guarding our hearts against devastation because he knows he's the only one that will ever, never leave you. Your family's going to leave you, your loved ones, your friends. Everyone is going to leave you. It's not a happy thought, but when those people are gone, who do we turn to? We turn to God. And he's there. He's waiting for us. He made us human. He made us with feelings. He made us love. Life itself will crush us if we do not place God first in our lives. As human beings, my family was gone. It was at no fault of their own or mine. They didn't abandon me, but I felt abandoned. You look to God as your father, like a parent. He's with us to protect us. God is the only one we can depend on to be with us forever. If we'll study the Word of God, he will help us make our decisions, but we have to learn those words of God. God directs us subtly and gently. He allows us to make our decisions, but if you learn that Bible, your decisions will be made in what God wants you to make them. Be responsible in your decisions you make, but remember who's in control. I've spoken about King Solomon. He wrote a book, wrote a sermon in Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. And he struggled all through his life trying to find happiness. He reflects on his life's journeys and how he tried everything in life to receive happiness. He tried riches. He tried everything he could find. He tries to spare us life's experiences when he wrote this book by telling us that everything apart from God is empty, hollow, and meaningless. It doesn't mean your family is meaningless. He's telling you the true joy in your life is in God. As he struggled with his life's futility, he learned through his struggles there's only one purpose we have in life: seek happiness and the fulfillment of life in God alone. 3 things will last forever in our life. We all know this: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Well, Mom and Dad were great parents. They did have 2 lives, and they got a little more lenient with me, but then they let Lisa run wild. First date, she got to stay out till midnight. I mean, I had an 11 o'clock curfew till I was married. So, anyway, that's another story. I'll tell you that later. But I had a good job in Wichita Falls. Mom and Dad, I was released from the hospital to come back and live with them. And I wanted to go back to work. I didn't know anything else to do. People I worked with helped me find an apartment. I threw myself in the job. We got this new contraption in the office called a computer. We had 1 computer in the conference room, and we had to take turns using it. So I became proficient on the computer. I joined a health club, something I'd never done before in my life. I got involved in photography, stained glass painting, because I knew an idle mind is the devil's workshop. And I knew if I sat there in Wichita Falls in that apartment, the devil would get a hold of me. I was a prime candidate. I went back to work. My company that I worked for was wonderful. They promised me the entire time I could come back. I'd always have a job there when I was through healing. And one day, I was emotional. I went back to work about 3 months after the wreck, and the least little thing somebody could say, "I'm so sorry," and I was just an emotional wreck. And one day my boss walked through my office. I sat at the front desk, and he looked at me, and I had a pile of Kleenexes on my desk, and I'm red-eyed and red-nosed. And he said, "I want to see you in my office." And my heart just sank. And I thought, this is it. I'm getting fired. Well, he walked down the hall, and he opened the door, and he said, "Sit down," just in that tone. And I sat down, and he closed the door. And then he sat down across the desk from me, and he reached in the drawer, and I thought, he's getting out the pink slip, And he handed me a box of Kleenexes. And I started apologizing. "I'm sorry, I can't. I try to keep it going, but I just can't." And he said, "You got through yesterday, didn't you?" "Yeah, but, I cried." And then he said, "Well, you're going to get through today. It's not going to be easy, but you're going to get through it." He said, "Let's just take this one day at a time." I thought, well, that's unique. I can take it one day at a time. And he said, "Anytime you need to cry," I guess he wanted me out of the front office. He said, "Anytime you want to cry, there's a conference table there in his office." He said, "Even if I'm not here, come sit in here, close the door, and cry, and feel better." So I did. Cried and cried and cried. In Matthew 6:34, it says, "Don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. God had placed into action another of his plans. My boss was going through a divorce. He needed somebody to talk to. And we became friends. And we became more than friends. We fell in love. God placed me there in that office in Wichita Falls. He didn't keep me here in Valley View. He put me back in Wichita Falls. And in January, this coming January, Bob and I will be married 25 years. And that's the biggest joy in my life. Just about finished here. Am I all right? Okay. Experience joy and spend more time with God. Bob and I began a wonderful life together. We got married in Wichita Falls. He got transferred to Midland. Then he got transferred to Bakersfield, California. And then he was able to take early retirement, and we moved back to Texas after we traveled for a year. We were in Nakona, Texas. I'd heard of Nakona Hills, the golf course and the lake. Never been there. 30 miles from here, and I'd never been there. So we built a house there. And while we were back there, I missed something here. We traveled a lot. And after the wreck, I'd had so many surgeries that I found out I wasn't able to have children. I had to have a hysterectomy. Bob didn't have any children. So we were at the point, he was a few years older than me, so we were at a point in our lives where we decided maybe Cocker Spaniels were a better selection for us. So we have Cocker Spaniels now, but Bob says that they're easier to get babysitters for. We have our Cocker Spaniels, and we love them to death. It's like our kids. But we hadn't been active in church. We'd moved to all these places. We'd gone to church. And they were friendly, but you just didn't have that connection. I'd grown up in a little small church, and we were going to these huge mega churches, and it didn't work. But we moved back to Nakona Hills, and there was a little yellow building church there with lime green carpet in it. And we started going because all of our friends were there. And we learned so much in that church. We became active. Bob became a board member. We found out, when you're new, you always get the new officers. So keep that in mind when you... But there was 30 or 40 members. They brought in a new pastor, and the church started growing. And he asked me to be his secretary. And there was nothing. We had a telephone in that church. And before we knew it, we were building a 200-seat sanctuary, and our congregation was up to 150 to 200 people. And it was a wonderful job. I learned so much, and I learned I had something to offer to other people. I had a story that I'd lived through to tell. So I became more of a counselor to a lot of people. And I did some testimonies. I talked to the teens, and I talked to some Bible study groups, and they all said, "You gotta write a book." Like I am. So my pastor encouraged me to write a book. He said, "You've got an amazing story. You need to tell others. You've got to spread that word. If you don't, you're not obedient to God." So when I left the church as a secretary, I thought, okay, this is it. Bob was traveling. We started attending churches in different areas. And I got to attend a lot of Bible studies with other women. And I realized I did have something to tell others. We had been all over the United States and attended all the different churches. So I became involved in a ministry. And that's probably one of the most important things you can do as a new church member or an ancient church member. Give something back God intends you to give back. He doesn't mean just money. He doesn't mean tithing altogether. He means share what you've got. So he laid this message on me to write a book. And I thought, great, I'd love to talk about myself. What better story? I got all these wonderful stories about Lisa and about David, and David jumping off a tractor, and Danny hitting me in the head with an axe. Just wonderful stories. Grandma Clifton, just all wonderful stories. So I started writing. This was 2 years ago. I started writing, and I wrote a chapter, started a chapter. I thought, okay, I'm not getting anywhere. I'll start another chapter and tell about this. So I did that, and it didn't work either. So I worked and struggled on it for about a year, and then I told Bob, I said, you know, this is becoming a headache. I didn't really want to write anymore. So I told Bob, I said, we're going to Colorado. God has blessed us that we're able to live in Colorado in the summers. So we took our motorhome and we went to